Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at Jamaica
Okay.
after Hurricane Beryl, especially with the 2025 elections coming up.
Yeah.
So we've got this report here that kind of breaks down all the hurricane's impact, and
Okay.
it's a lot to unpack.
I bet.
There's a jaw-dropping $32 billion in damages.
Wow.
To put that into perspective, that's like the entire GDP of Iceland just wiped out
Yeah, I think
in a single storm.
hard to even imagine.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about how this is affecting everyday life in Jamaica and maybe even how it'll shake up the,
Political landscape.
yeah, the political landscape. Exactly.
Yeah. It's really fascinating to see how something like this can just expose, a country's economic and social vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So we'll be digging into all the data here.
Yeah.
But also really trying to explore what this means for the people.
Exactly. And this report really does paint a stark picture when it comes to the economy.
Yeah.
Beryl really slammed some of Jamaica's most vital industries.
Yeah.
Like agriculture, for instance.
Right.
They saw a 13.5% plunge in production.
Wow.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second. 13 parishes are reporting major crop losses.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's not just a number.
No.
That means farmers are struggling, and we could be looking at food shortages and price hikes.
Absolutely. And that's going to impact everyone, not just the farmer.
Exactly. It's all interconnected.
Yeah, this report really does highlight how vulnerable countries like Jamaica are to this kind of shock.
Yeah.
Take mining, for example. It's down 6.5%.
Right.
Might not sound as dramatic as agriculture, but it's
Yeah.
a huge blow to a really key sector.
So what about tourism?
Yeah.
I mean, usually that's like a reliable source of income for Jamaica.
Yeah,
But this time it took a hit, too.
it did.
I think canceled flights, cruises are being diverted,
Yeah.
hotels are empty. The report says that hotels and restaurants,
Mm-hmm.
they saw a 4% drop in revenue.
Yeah, and that might seem small.
But it adds up.
It does. It really does. For an industry that relies on that steady income, those losses really add up. It affects everyone.
Everyone.
From hotel staff to taxi drivers.
Local craft vendors.
Yeah, it's all connected. What's so interesting is how these seemingly separate sectors are actually so deeply entwined. When tourism suffers, people lose their jobs. They have less money to spend.
Right.
And that impacts other businesses. It just creates this ripple effect across the entire economy.
And it's not just the economy, right? We got to think about everyday life for Jamaicans.
Right, of course.
Beryl really did a number on their infrastructure.
It did.
Over 400,000 homes were without power for weeks.
Weeks.
Weeks. Imagine that disruption to daily life, families, businesses, hospitals.
Imagine.
And then there's the transportation damage. $10.3 billion worth. Roads, bridges, ports, all impacted,
Wow.
making it harder to, get around and deliver aid.
Yeah.
And on top of all of that, the power grid itself sustained $4.1 billion in damages.
It's just a massive repair bill.
It is. And it's going to take a lot of time and resources to fix.
Absolutely. And this brings up a crucial question. How is the government handling all of this?
Right.
Are there efforts enough to meet the needs on the ground?
Well, the report looks at that political arena, and it seems like the ruling party, the JLP,
Okay.
they're really pushing this idea of fiscal responsibility. They're saying no new taxes, no new debt to fund this recovery.
Interesting.
They're planning on relying on these financial buffers put in place through past reforms.
Okay.
Sounds fiscally responsible, but is it enough to, help people who are struggling right now?
It's definitely a different approach than we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
Past governments often turn to borrowing after disasters, this no new debt stance.
Yeah.
It's a gamble. The report points out that critics, especially from the opposition, they're questioning how fast recovery is happening.
Yeah.
5 months after Beryl, there are still almost 2,000 people living in shelters. Think about that. Almost 2,000 people, including 113 children, still displaced from their homes.
Yeah.
And the damage to the port at Rocky Point,
Right.
which is, major for trade and the economy,
Yeah.
it's still causing disruptions.
So where are these recovery funds actually going? It seems like a big chunk, like 60%, is being used to stabilize the power grid.
That makes sense when you think about how important a stable power supply is.
Yeah.
Hospitals, businesses, schools, everything relies on reliable electricity.
Right.
Without it, the recovery process would just stop.
True. But the report also mentions that funds for agricultural recovery are being delayed until the next fiscal year.
Oh, wow.
And that seems like a problem for rural areas that really depend on farming.
Definitely. If farmers can't replant, if they can't get back on their feet,
Right.
That impact could be devastating.
It's a really crucial point.
Yeah.
And it connects directly to the political landscape.
It does.
If we think about it, rural parishes like Clarendon and St. Elizabeth,
Yeah.
they were really hard hit by Beryl, and they were JLP strongholds in the last election.
Okay, so those are the areas that rely most heavily on agriculture.
Yeah.
Any delay in aid could mean people get frustrated with the ruling party.
Exactly. They could feel let down, especially those farmers who are just trying to rebuild their lives.
Absolutely.
And the report also highlights the rise in youth unemployment in those areas hit hardest by Beryl.
Yeah.
It's jumped to 24%. That's a huge number, especially when you think about the fact that 62% of young people are registered voters.
That's a significant voting bloc.
It is, and they're facing real economic hardship.
Yeah, you can't ignore a demographic like that.
Nope. And this is where things get really interesting. The opposite, the PNP, they see this as an opportunity to kind of paint the JLP as out of touch.
Okay.
They're using this crisis to shape a narrative that could really sway voters.
So how are they doing that?
Well, this seems like their strategy is to draw a contrast between the JLP's insistence on this no new debt and the suffering that's happening on the ground. They're calling for emergency job programs, highlighting the families still in shelters, and pointing to the delays in aid to places like, the agriculture sector.
So they're trying to make the case that the JLP is too focused on the long term and not enough on the immediate needs.
Right. And the PNP, they've got a powerful tool. They've got the voices of the people who are affected by Beryl.
Oh, yeah.
The report quotes a fisherman in Alligator Pond who lost his boat and his nets in the storm.
Wow.
And he asks this really simple but heartbreaking question.
What's that?
No boats, no nets, how feed Pickney?
It's powerful.
Yeah, and that feeling resonates in these communities where people feel forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a classic political battle between pragmatism and empathy. The JLP is all about fiscal responsibility, arguing that's the only way to recover in the long term.
Yeah.
The PNP is appealing to emotion,
right,
highlighting how urgent this is and that people need help now.
And the Jamaica people are caught in the middle.
They are.
They're trying to make sense of it, all weigh their options, and figure out who they think can lead them through this.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process, isn't it?
It is. We've got this economic fallout, this political battle brewing, and the struggles of everyday Jamaicans. It's all intertwined.
It is, but there's even more to consider. There are a couple of things. Some wild cards that could really change the game in Jamaica.
Wild cards. Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, this is where things get even more interesting.
I bet. But we'll save that for the next part of our deep dive.
We will.
Just stay with us.
So we were talking about how Hurricane Beryl is really playing this, major role in Jamaican politics.
Right, especially with the election coming up.
Yeah. Every move the government makes is being watched.
It is. That's politics for you. And with the election getting closer, everything just gets more intense.
It does. The PNP is definitely not letting this opportunity slip away.
Right.
They're framing this whole disaster as evidence of the JLP's shortcomings, pointing to every delay in aid and every unmet need.
Yeah, and using those voices of frustration.
Exactly. And they're not just focusing on the present either.
No, they're not. The report mentioned that they're bringing up past disaster responses.
Right, like from the 1980s.
Yeah, trying to say the JLP is slow and out of touch.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. They're talking about the Manley era.
Yeah.
Back when the government was seen as more proactive and, empathetic. Maybe trying to tap into some nostalgia.
Yeah, especially for those older voters who might remember those times.
Exactly. And might want that kind of leadership again.
It's interesting how history can be used like that.
It is.
To, shape these narratives. But the JLP is sticking to their message. They're all about fiscal responsibility.
Right. So it seems like they're playing the long game, hoping voters will reward them in the end.
Yeah, for making those tough choices now.
Right. But it's risky. While fiscal responsibility is important, people need to see results, especially after something like Beryl. If the recovery is slow, if their lives are still disrupted, if they don't see real improvement, they might not be patient enough to wait for those long-term benefits.
It's a good reminder that in times of crisis, people need more than just, numbers and economic indicators.
Exactly. They need to feel seen and heard and supported.
Yeah. The report does a good job at highlighting some of those stories.
It does.
The experiences of everyday Jamaicans.
We get the big picture from the data and statistics, but it's those personal stories that connect with people.
Yeah.
That's what makes it real and relatable.
Exactly. And it's often what drives change.
Absolutely.
The report talks about farmers in Treasure Beach who are trying to replant but can't get help.
Right.
Workers at a power station in Kingston working so hard to fix the grid, but with limited resources.
Those are the faces of Beryl's aftermath.
They are.
The people dealing with the consequences.
And those are the faces the PNP wants to bring to the forefront.
Right. They want people to connect with that human cost, to feel like they need to do something now.
It's like this tug of war.
It is.
On one side, you've got the JLP, all about logic and responsibility. On the other side, you've got the PNP and empathy and this need for immediate action.
And the Jamaican people are stuck in the middle.
Trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, and decide who can actually lead them out of this.
It's easy to get caught up in all the political back and forth.
It is.
But this isn't just some game. This is about people's lives.
Their hopes, their fears, their futures.
And in Jamaica right now, those stakes are really high.
They are, but there are some factors that could change everything.
Right. Those wild cards we were talking about.
Yes, those wild cards. They could really shake things up for both the JLP and the PNP.
One of those wild cards is the Jamaican diaspora.
Oh, right. The millions of Jamaicans living abroad.
Yeah, many with strong ties to their homeland.
And they've historically supported the JLP.
They have. But their loyalty might be tested this time.
Why is that?
They're seeing the devastation.
Right, through images and stories.
Exactly, hearing about the struggles and the delays.
And it creates a really strong connection.
It does. One that could be more powerful than, their usual party loyalty.
Imagine being thousands of miles away,
Yeah.
seeing your family struggle and not being able to do anything.
That's a powerful motivator.
It is, and it could have a real impact on the election.
Yeah. And it's not just emotional either.
No, you're right.
The diaspora plays a big economic role.
Through remittances.
Exactly. The money they send back home.
It's a lifeline for so many families.
It is. If they sense things are unstable or that there's no progress.
Those remittances could slow down.
Which would hurt the economy even more.
And give the PNP more ammunition to use against the JLP.
Right. They'd say, look, your approach isn't working.
So the JLP has to walk this fine line.
They do.
Show that they're helping people, including the diaspora, but also stick to their whole fiscal responsibility thing.
It's a tough balancing act.
It is. And to make it even harder, there's another wild card.
Right. The funding gap.
Yeah. The UN report mentioned it.
$3.5 million shortfall in aid.
Right. If they can't get that money, Jamaica might have to ask the IMF for help.
Which would probably mean taking on more loans.
And that would put the JLP in a really tough spot.
It would. Their whole campaign is no new taxes, no new debt.
Exactly. If they have to go back on that promise,
yeah,
it could really hurt them, especially with voters who are already struggling.
So they've got this choice to make.
They do. A difficult one.
Compromise their message to get the money they need.
Or risk making things even harder for the people they're supposed to be helping.
It's a classic dilemma.
It is. Yeah. And it shows just how hard it is to govern when something like this happens.
It really is. Beryl has created this perfect storm for political drama.
It has. You've got economic hardship,
right,
social unrest, a divided population.
And these wild cards that could change everything.
It's a textbook example of how something outside of anyone's control can reshape politics.
So what does this all mean for Jamaica's future?
It's too early to say for sure, but one thing's for sure.
What's that?
The 2025 election is going to be a big one.
Definitely. One of the most important in recent history.
Absolutely. What happens in the coming months will be crucial.
It will. For Jamaica's recovery and for their political future.
This is a big moment for them.
This deep dive has been quite the journey.
It has.
We've gone from Beryl's aftermath to Jamaican politics to the diaspora.
And we can't forget about the threat of future storms.
But there's one more wild card we haven't talked about yet.
Ah, yes. The most unpredictable one of all. But we'll save that for our final segment. Stay with us.
All right, so we're back. And we have been talking about Hurricane Beryl and, its impact on Jamaican politics.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground. The economic fallout, the government's response, how the opposition's trying to use this.
The diaspora.
Yeah. And the diaspora. But, things are never simple.
Especially in politics.
Exactly. And as we've said, there are always these unexpected things.
Wild cards.
Yeah, the wild cards. That can totally change the game.
And in Jamaica, maybe the most unpredictable wild card is
Mother Nature, the one thing no politician can ever really control.
Nope. We've been focusing on Beryl and what happened right after.
Right.
But the truth is, Jamaica is incredibly vulnerable to hurricanes.
It's just a fact of life in the Caribbean. And with climate change, we're seeing these more extreme weather events.
Right.
That vulnerability becomes even more
Serious.
Yeah. The report talks about how Jamaica has been hit by these major hurricanes so many times, and each one just leaves behind, so much damage.
It's a cycle. Rebuild, recover, and then brace for the next one.
And that threat hangs over everything.
Including politics.
Imagine another major hurricane hits before the election.
Oh, wow.
It could completely change things.
How so?
Think about it. How the government responds, how quickly they get aid to people. All of that would be under a microscope.
Yeah, it could be a make-or-break moment for whoever's in power.
Exactly. A good response could help them, but if they mess it up...
It could be really bad for them.
Yeah. And it's not just the immediate response either. The long-term effects of these hurricanes can have a big impact on politics, too.
The report talked about that.
Yeah, it said all these hurricanes have made it harder for Jamaica to develop economically.
Yeah, infrastructure problems. All the crops they lose.
Right. And that feeling of vulnerability.
It affects investment and tourism.
It does. So this vulnerability just adds another layer to everything we've talked about.
To the recovery, the political strategies, everything.
It's a reminder that we can analyze all we want, but sometimes nature has other plans.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are your final thoughts?
I think the main thing to remember is that everything's connected. A hurricane doesn't just cause damage, it exposes these vulnerabilities.
Right.
It sparks these political debates.
And forces us to think about the long-term challenges.
Exactly, like climate change and how to make things more resilient.
It's a reminder that politics isn't just about, ideas. It's about real people.
It is. Their lives, their jobs, their hopes for the future.
And in Jamaica, those things are so important right now.
They are. So let's not forget the human side of all this.
Yeah.
The farmers trying to rebuild the families without homes and the young people looking for work.
Their stories are really what's at the heart of this.
They are.
This deep dive has been really something, hasn't it?
It has. We've covered so much.
Beryl's impact, the politics, the diaspora, the threat of future storms.
It's a reminder that it's important to stay informed.
Yeah.
To talk about these things and to see how everything's connected.
Because those connections can really change things.
They can.
So as we end here, keep Jamaica in your thoughts.
They're facing these huge challenges.
But they're also showing incredible resilience.
They are. What happens in the next year will be so important.
For the people and for their future.
Will they rebuild stronger? Will their leaders step up? We'll have to see.
The Jamaican people have this history of overcoming adversity.
They do. They've faced storms before and come out stronger.
That resilience will guide them as they move forward.
Ew.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Jamaica after Hurricane Beryl. We hope you found it informative.
And remember, this is just the beginning. Keep asking questions, stay engaged, and keep learning about our world.